I'm Jessica, and I look after my father-in-law at my in-laws' house while working from home. It appears that my father-in-law has always been committed to his job, but he overworked himself and hurt his back, which negatively impacted his general health. I consented to live with my husband, Peter, at his parents' home and assist because my mother-in-law is too old to care for him alone. Since the time of my father-in-law's father, the family has lived in the large, one-story house. My mother-in-law and Peter are both a little cocky, which may be related to the size of our home. Despite being a housewife, my mother-in-law claims she is incapable of leading a normal life, and Peter, despite his little income, maintains that I am not like other people. I've come to know their arrogance since living with them, but as they do enough housework to compensate for their lavish spending, I've kept silent. It seems that my father-in-law shares the same sentiment as me. However, due to his health issues, he confided in me that it was difficult to contribute any more money to the family. My father-in-law understands that Peter doesn't earn much, and considering the attitudes of both my mother-in-law and Peter, it wasn't an atmosphere where they could openly discuss it. Understanding my father-in-law's feelings, I decided to be a pillar of strength for this family. I could manage my father-in-law's care while working from home because I only need to support him when necessary. My mother-in-law left the care to me and continued her life as if nothing had changed, doing housework and going out with her friends. Jessica, I'm sorry if it wasn't for my bad back. I wouldn't have had to trouble you like this. Please don't apologize. You've worked hard for the family all this time. Now please rest. My father-in-law smiled with relief at my words, but perhaps due to his previous overwork, he gradually lost his strength. When he and I went to the hospital for his checkup, we discovered that he had cancer, which was a shock to both of us. When I told my mother-in-law and Peter about the cancer, they were shocked. They bombarded him with questions about how long he had left and how much the treatment would cost. It surprised me that my mother-in-law and Peter, who hadn't talked much with my father-in-law since his health declined, suddenly showed an interest in talking to him. One day, when Peter was at work and my mother-in-law was out with a friend, my father-in-law spoke to me. The reason those two asked about my remaining time and treatment costs is probably because they're eyeing my inheritance. They must be planning to keep me in good spirits until I die, wondering how much I'll leave them. Jessica, this might cause you some discomfort, but I'm on your side. Thank you for not abandoning our family. As my father-in-law said, Peter and my mother-in-law seemed displeased that I spend a lot of time with him, and they started making snide remarks. Come to think of it, why does my daughter-in-law stay at home all the time without doing any housework? My mother-in-law started talking to Peter during dinner. Peter grimaced and replied, I don't know. She quit her job without telling me and started staying at home. It's really annoying. Maybe she came to this house aiming for Dad's money. They started saying such mean things right in front of me. We usually ate dinner with just the three of us, my mother-in-law, Peter, and I, as my father-in-law ate in his own room. Left without any support, I was forced to hear harsh words from both of them. I am working, I tried to argue, but was told, What are you talking about? You haven't worked since you came to this house. Don't lie when you haven't earned a single penny. The reason we can live comfortably is because Peter goes out and works for us. You do nothing all day and just idle around the house. They made these accusations without even checking what I was doing at home. Thinking that continuing my meal here would only result in more complaints, I decided to take the meal to my father-in-law's room. But at that moment, my mother-in-law snatched the tray from my hands. I have no intention of letting a woman like you, who's after my husband's money, serve him food. I will take it myself. I had been preparing nutritious meals based on my father-in-law's requests, but my mother-in-law pretended not to know that and tried to take the completed meal as if she made it by herself. I was disappointed in my mother-in-law's scheming and credit-stealing behavior. Thinking that arguing would only trouble my father-in-law, I said to my mother-in-law, "Please go ahead," and let her serve the meal. Peter and his mother were trying to separate me from my father-in-law, even when my father-in-law was hospitalized. I was not allowed to visit him. However, I was in contact with my father-in-law through my mobile phone. It seemed that Peter and his mother, fearing that I might inherit some of my father-in-law's estate since I had been caring for him, were trying to turn him against me. Despite the fact that it was Peter and his mother who were keeping me away from my father-in-law, I was disgusted to hear that they were saying I disliked taking care of him. It seems that my father-in-law just nodded along and ignored their words in order to protect me from further blame from them. "Jess, those two said you took money from the house and even talked about divorce." My father-in-law's message made me laugh. There had been no talk of divorce from Peter, and for some reason, they were not trying to kick me out of the house either. Perhaps they wanted to keep an eye on my movements since my father-in-law and I were close. They probably thought that if I was kicked out of the house, I would be free to go and visit him. Indeed, if I divorced Peter and was kicked out of the house, I would be free from their constraints and would visit my benefactor, my father-in-law. Peter and his mother seemed to understand me well. Afterwards, I continued my remote work, enduring criticism from Peter and his mother, and keeping in touch with my father-in-law. However, half a year later, my father-in-law passed away. I busied myself with arranging the funeral in order to endure my grief. Peter and his mother did not help with the funeral arrangements, so I arranged things as my father-in-law had wished. About a week after the funeral, there was an incident while I was working from home. Peter and his mother suddenly came into the room. They had never entered my room like this before, so I was surprised, but quickly saved my data and turned off my computer. "What's wrong? Don't you realize what you're doing? I know you've been embezzling the household's money. It seems you also received money from my husband. What a despicable woman." "What do you mean?" I could not understand a word of what my mother-in-law was saying. I had never received any money from my father-in-law, and I had no idea how there could be such a misunderstanding. In my confusion, Peter glared at me and then said, "You cozied up to my dad, showing off your youth to get his money. You betrayed me, your own husband." I wished he wouldn't make such baseless and dirty assumptions. I had always valued my relationship with my father-in-law and had sincerely taken care of him. I never did anything to cozy up to him. "Aren't you misunderstanding? I never did anything like that." However, they didn't believe me. They began packing up my belongings without my consent. "Wait a minute, please. You need to leave this house. I have prepared the divorce papers, so sign them quickly and then go turn them in," Peter yelled, throwing the divorce papers at me. As expected, they were afraid I would visit my father-in-law in the hospital, and that's why they hadn't brought up divorce before. "You are no longer needed in this house. Get out, you bum!" My mother-in-law yelled at me, throwing clothes at me. Peter hurled insults at me, saying, "You freeloader," and handed me a pen to sign the divorce papers. After being treated so horribly, I knew there was no point in staying in this house. Since my father-in-law's funeral was over, I quickly signed the divorce papers. "Okay, I'll leave. I'll pack my things myself so you don't need to help me." As I said that, Peter and his mother, who had no intention of helping, left the room, looking relieved. I packed my belongings, found a new place to live, and promptly left their house. When I informed Peter and my mother-in-law that I had submitted the divorce papers, they were pleased. They would be having a hard time from here on out, so they should enjoy this moment while it lasts. Within a month of me leaving the house, Peter called. I was working and ignored his call, but later I received an email from him. "Hey, all the money in the house is gone. You stole it, didn't you?" Now I was being accused of theft. I hadn't stolen anything. My father-in-law had kept the money securely, and there wasn't any readily accessible cash in the house, so even if they searched, they wouldn't find any. "We should discuss the money when we talk about the inheritance. I replied to his email, but I received no reply from him. It seemed that he had completely forgotten about the inheritance discussion. After a while, I received contact about setting up a meeting regarding the inheritance. I had decided not to block their contact until I was called for such a meeting, so I headed to my former in-laws' house as instructed. It's odd to call it my in-laws' house since Peter and I are now divorced. When I arrived, my mother-in-law, Peter, and another man in a suit were waiting in the living room. When the man read the will, Peter and my mother-in-law turned pale. The majority of my father-in-law's estate was left to me, the house to my mother-in-law, and the remaining money to Peter. Hearing this, my mother-in-law screamed, "That's a lie! Why does this woman inherit the majority of the estate? The only family of that man are myself and Peter. This woman is a stranger." The man in the suit was shocked at how Peter's mother dramatically changed, almost lunging forward in her agitation. Peter glared at me and said, "It's ridiculous that most of the inheritance is going to you. Did you manipulate Dad or something?" Determined to end my relationship with Peter and my mother-in-law, I decided to ask something that had been on my mind. "By the way, why did you think I was getting money from your father? Stop changing the subject. I just want to clear up any doubts since we won't be involved with each other anymore. Can you just tell me?" Dad said it last time, "Jessica, money every month." His words were broken because he wasn't fully conscious, but he definitely said it. That means Dad was lending you money every month, right? You've got it backwards. What? Finally, I understood why Peter and my mother-in-law had mistakenly thought that I was borrowing money from my father-in-law. In reality, I was the one contributing about $5,500 every month to my father-in-law, or rather to their house. Maybe he was talking about me providing $5,500 monthly as living expenses. He used to apologize for taking money from me every month. What? $5,500 every month? Why were you contributing money to the house? Because neither you nor your mother contributed a single penny despite your father being unable to work anymore. That's why I was supporting this house. I felt uncomfortable not contributing while living here. But still, $5,500? The maintenance of your big house and your mother's spending made it that much. But I wanted to enjoy the good food and other benefits that came with it, so I kept quiet. I had been satisfied with our life because I had my father-in-law on my side, and I wasn't particularly troubled, so I never mentioned anything to Peter or my mother-in-law. But I was very surprised that most of the inheritance would be coming to me. If the majority of the inheritance doesn't go to Peter and my mother-in-law, it will be difficult for them to pay the house's maintenance and other living expenses. How could you afford to pay $5,500 every month? You weren't working, were you? I told you that I was working from home, remember? We had that conversation before I moved in. Have you forgotten? Did you tell me something like that? Apparently, Peter had completely forgotten about our conversation. I was astounded. If Peter didn't remember our conversation, my mother-in-law probably didn't know either. Both of them must have thought I was unemployed. If I wasn't working, it would mean that I was just idling around at home every day after my father-in-law was hospitalized. But I'm not the type to do nothing and just expect to be taken care of. Then let's start over, you and me. What? I couldn't believe my ears. I asked for a divorce because I thought you were a freeloader. You must have been upset and signed the divorce papers thinking you were being abandoned. If you're not unemployed, there's no reason for us to be divorced. What? I don't understand. You love me, right? You must have hated divorcing me. I'm saying that I'll take back the divorce, so come back home. What a joke. Why should I take care of you and your mother? I stayed because your father was kind and I wanted to repay him. But I have no love left for you and your mother. You always insulted me and were sarcastic. Why should I keep supporting people like that? Hey, your feelings for me, have they cooled off? Of course, there's no love left. At this moment, Peter was receiving the biggest shock of his life. He must have genuinely believed that I was still infatuated with him all this time. Instead of being on my side, he conspired with my mother-in-law to kick me out of the house. If he thought that I still liked him after that, he's a complete fool. I sighed deeply. My mother-in-law, advised by the man in the suit, finally understood that they would receive hardly any inheritance, and was deeply disappointed. You and your mother will have to live together from now on. I won't support you with any more of my money. With your monthly salary of $2,000, you will have to adjust your lifestyles. I had no intention whatsoever of renouncing my inheritance rights for Peter and my mother-in-law. I am not that kind-hearted. Ignoring their demands for money, I left the house. I had no plans to interact with Peter and my mother-in-law in the future, so I blocked their contact and changed my mobile phone. Of course, Peter and my mother-in-law don't know my current address. After a while, I heard that Peter and my mother-in-law had visited my parents' house. My parents live far away, and I was surprised to hear that they had suddenly shown up there. Bring out Jessica immediately. Even if we're divorced, she is still my wife. All the wife's money is mine. I will never forgive her for running away with my property. If you hide her, I can't promise what will happen to you. Peter and my mother-in-law were shouting in front of my parents' house. My parents were frightened and immediately called the police. Surprisingly, when the police arrived, Peter and my mother-in-law assaulted the officers, injuring them, and were then taken into custody. I learned that they had sold the large house they lived in and moved to a rundown apartment. However, they still continued their lavish lifestyle and naturally fell into financial difficulty. They resorted to crime, like stealing beef from the local supermarket, showing a serious decline in their overall situation. Knowing they had no intention of earning money and were prone to criminal behavior, I became terrified. Now it seems that they are incarcerated. If they are ever released from prison, to prevent them from finding me, I have told people around me about them and ensured that my personal information remains confidential. My parents are also selling their current house and starting a new life in the countryside as they had planned before, so Peter and my mother-in-law won't be able to find them. My name is Lucy. I live with my husband, Michael. We first met back in our student days. We started dating soon after and continued our relationship through the transition from students to working adults. Then Michael proposed, and that led us to marriage. Since we had a loving relationship and lived together, other than the fact of being officially married, not much changed after the wedding, and we have been living peacefully as a couple without any conflicts. We were seen by our in-laws as a harmonious and peaceful pair. However, our gentle nature may have seemed too soft to those two. Those two refers to my sister-in-law, Emily, and her husband, Richard. They had married 2 years before us. Having been with Michael for a long time, I was well aware of his sister's marriage too. However, it seemed that Emily's wedding wasn't entirely smooth. She seemed to be the type who cared about appearances, declaring, "I will only invite women who look less attractive than me to my wedding," leaving her parents-in-law bewildered. I wonder what her friends who were invited to the wedding would think if they heard that. She must not have considered that at all, to be able to say such things. I was told she uttered those words in front of the friends she invited, and the room was instantly enveloped in silence. One woman said, "Isn't that too much?" But she retorted, "Stop being jealous of me. You should be grateful I invited you all, who are almost in your 30s. Whether Richard's friends see you all as potential partners is another matter." And that made the atmosphere even colder. Despite being such a rude person, I couldn't understand why Richard doesn't divorce her, but the answer was quite simple. Richard, just like Emily, is someone who makes impolite comments. Far from admonishing Emily for mocking their wedding guests, Richard added insult to injury by saying, "Emily, it's cruel to confront them with the truth. Even ugly people have feelings." As a result, more of their own friends kept their distance from them. Even those who weren't invited to the wedding cut their ties with them after hearing stories from the attendees. While friends can sever connections, we, being relatives, find it hard to do so. This apartment is quite splendid. Normally you'd think of a detached house as a mansion, but with this much space, even an apartment can be called a mansion. Emily suddenly visited our apartment and expressed her impression as she looked around. I was baffled by her unexpected visit. However, she proceeded to walk down the hall, opening doors one after another. All I could do was stand there, dumbfounded. Michael, her own brother, was just as surprised, standing with his mouth agape. While we were stunned, Emily freely snooped around our home. "Where are the beer and snacks?" Richard asked us, opening the fridge without permission. Mission? I couldn't help but be astonished by the audacity of my brother-in-law and his wife. In any typical household, opening doors and refrigerators without asking is considered rude, something we're all taught. I was just dumbfounded by their inability to follow such basic courtesy. "I'm sorry, but may I ask what brings you here today?" I inquired after taking a deep breath to compose myself. "Didn't you invite Mom and Dad over to this apartment? It only makes sense that I, as your sister, would be welcome too, right? By the way, why haven't you offered any tea yet?" she declared, while munching on snacks she found in the kitchen cabinet without our consent, eating snacks from the shelf without asking, then demanding tea. With a heavy heart, I served tea to Emily and Richard. It's true that a few days ago, we did invite my parents-in-law over, but that was for a special reason, not to show off our home. The term invite felt a bit off to begin with. "I bet you served Mom and Dad some delicious sweets and fancy tea, huh? After all, you need to stay in Dad's good books, don't you?" she said, looking at us with an uncomfortable gaze laced with sarcasm. Neither Michael nor I could think of any reason to ingratiate ourselves with my father-in-law. We've never used flattery just to attract his attention. We just couldn't grasp whatever Emily was trying to say. "What are you getting at, Emily?" "We're not trying to get Dad to like us or anything," Michael inquired with a chuckle. Emily retorted, "You wouldn't be able to stay at the company if you don't lick his boots, right?" Michael and I exchanged glances, puzzled. True, my father-in-law runs a business, and Michael is one of his employees, but Michael works there earnestly under his father, who doesn't play favorites. He's been through tough training, and now holds a position managing a team. There's no need for sycophancy to keep his job. Of course, it's only proper to show due respect to his father, the CEO of the company. I'm the center of the family, and Michael came into the picture later, right? So Michael should be concerned about Dad's feelings and mine. If I get upset, I could just ask Dad to kick you out of the company, she asserted confidently. Michael and I could only exchange looks. We had absolutely no idea what she was aiming for. Richard smirked proudly as Emily declared that we'd lose our jobs if we didn't bow down to her. I probably wasn't the only one who felt uncomfortable under his gaze. After making remarks beyond our comprehension, they left, leaving behind scattered snacks and spilled tea. Sighing, we began to clean up quickly. What was she trying to say? "That she'd have me fired?" Michael murmured. "Does Emily really have a say in personnel decisions?" I asked, and Michael shook his head. "No way. As you know, Dad's not especially soft on family members. If anything, he's pretty strict. Seeing Dad's strictness makes me think Mom spoiled Emily too much when she was young," he said. "Right. Dad wouldn't give Emily special treatment, that's for sure," I agreed. My mother-in-law could spoil young Emily to an extreme, and now deeply regrets it, saying she wishes she could hide in a hole for how she raised her. I can't help but feel pity for my parents-in-law for the disappointment they must feel towards their daughter's transformation into someone they didn't intend her to be. But why did Emily say she would fire you? Was there some kind of trouble? That's a real mystery. Michael and I could only shrug in confusion. No matter how much we ponder, Emily's true intentions were beyond us. Deciding not to dwell on it, I moved on to the next task at hand. That task was preparing to move. With this, most of the packing is done. Next is the big move, huh? After completing the paperwork and shipping the boxes, I took a flight to France. What was happening back in our home in the U.S. was beyond my imagination. Upon landing in France and turning on my phone, I discovered over 10 voicemail messages from Emily. Surprised, I thought of my in-laws. Despite my reservations, I immediately contacted her. "Emily, I just checked my phone. Is everything okay?" I asked urgently. The reply I received was completely unexpected. Finally got through to you. Since you didn't respond, Richard and I had a delightful time on your and Michael's bed," she said. What? I couldn't comprehend what she was saying and just tilted my head in confusion. Emily sounded pleased, so it seemed unlikely that anything had happened to my in-laws. "So I'm at your apartment now. You both seem to be away, and we're just enjoying this luxurious space," she continued. "Apartment? Our apartment where we used to live. Why are you there, and what do you mean by a delightful time with your husband?" I asked, bewildered. I was just holding my head, confused. I had known of Emily and Richard's impudence, but I never imagined it would come to this. They had prepared a spare key to use in our absence. This seemed to have been planned all along. "Oh yes, I got rid of all your stuff," she exclaimed. "What?" I was in shock because this wonderful home is ours now. "We'll set aside Michael's things until he comes to pick them up. I've disliked you since way back. This is my revenge," she declared. "I see. You were critical even at your own wedding about others' appearances. I never thought you'd turn that criticism on me. Before evaluating others' faces, you should take a look at the darkness in your own heart," I said. "Huh?" She seemed perplexed. "You said you disposed of my things, right?" I asked to confirm. "Yes, I threw them out. By the way, what was with your stuff? There were several albums, but not a single photo of you in them. They were all pictures with Michael at the center, and in all of them, he's not even looking at the camera. You really have no skill in taking photos. The albums were creepy, so I threw them out this morning," she bragged. Emily proudly detailed how she had thrown everything away. She boasted about discarding the clothes in the closet, the books and diaries on the bookshelves, and selling the computer and other electronics to someone she knew. I didn't get upset or raise my voice because those belongings weren't mine. "So how about it, Karen? Are you going to cry and ask me why I threw them away? If you cry, won't your face become even uglier?" she taunted. "Sorry to burst your bubble while you're enjoying throwing away someone else's stuff, but just so you know, Michael and I got divorced, and I now live overseas," I informed her. "What? That means the things you disposed of weren't mine." "Wait a minute. You lived in this apartment with Michael, right? And Michael's clothes are still here. How can Michael's things be here and not yours?" "That's because I left the apartment when we got divorced." "No way. You two always seem so happy together." Emily's surprise was understandable. Nonetheless, Michael and I were indeed divorced. "Actually, I split up with Michael because of your parents' request." "What? Remember the photos in the album you said you threw away? The ones where Michael isn't looking at the camera?" "Yes, I remember. But those photos were taken by a woman who was obsessed with Michael. They're candid. That's why he wasn't looking at the camera." "What?" "Michael and I had been troubled by that woman for a long time. We hoped she would give up on him once we were married. However, things were not that simple. She was convinced Michael was her destiny and interfered with our marriage multiple times. We managed not to invite her to the wedding, but her furious father turned out to be the head of a major corporation that my father-in-law, as a business owner, respected. Disregarding my daughter's feelings and proceeding with another woman? What's the meaning of this? If you don't marry my daughter, your business is over, he threatened without hesitation. When I mentioned this, Emily seemed lost for words, in shock. After a moment, I called out, "Hello?" And she snapped back, asking cautiously, "That woman, is she Rachel by any chance?" "Yes, that's right. You know Rachel, don't you? I heard she's your and Michael's childhood friend." "That Rachel? Is it really that Rachel?" It seemed Rachel had misunderstood their childhood friendship as something more and had harbored this misconception for years. Suddenly, Emily's cheerful tone changed drastically. "Don't tell me. After you got divorced and left this apartment, Rachel moved in to live here with Michael?" "Exactly. So the photo albums, clothes, and diaries I got rid of, they would all belong to Rachel, wouldn't they?" The moment she realized the situation, she inadvertently gasped. It seemed Rachel was someone Emily would rather avoid. Emily must have wanted to avoid unnecessary involvement with a woman whose father runs an even larger corporation than her own father. But now it's too late. "Hey, Lucy, can't we do something even now? If you come over quickly and explain, you did it out of spite because she took Michael away. As I mentioned before, I'm overseas now, so I can't be there instantly." "Ro, she'll definitely scold me. She's the type to bring her parents into even the smallest conflict and press the issue to the end. And to think I did it with my husband on the bed that was meant for her and Michael. It's too late for regrets now, and honestly, it's best to just tell the truth." "I can't do that." "Oh, I know. I'll clean up quickly and hide somewhere. I'm going to run away. If anyone asks, I'll just say Lucy caused it all." I told her that would be difficult. "Why would that be difficult?" "Because I accepted a substantial amount of money from Rachel to put some distance with her dream life with Michael. And I moved overseas to live a life I've always dreamed of." I've already told her that, but she was worried I might come back for Michael. So she gave me her contact information, insisting I call her as soon as I arrived overseas. I just sent her a photo of myself here and a screenshot from Messenger confirming you and Richard entered the apartment without permission. She just contacted me, saying she's already at the apartment. "Oh, wait, there's the intercom." With those words, the call ended. Presumably Rachel, accompanied by her father's men, swiftly took care of Emily and Richard. While Emily and Rachel's standoff continued, I focused on settling into my new life here. "Sorry I'm late, Lucy," Michael said with a smile as he hurried over to the airport. Because she was unable to give up on Michael, Rachel watched us dissolve our relationship in front of her, and we decided to hastily escape abroad. It was convenient for us as my in-laws and their company were at a standstill, possibly considering liquidation. Emily had long believed she would take over the company, but now faced the reality of it shutting down without having work. Today, in the end, Rachel forced Emily and Richard into hard labor at a company her father owned, angry that they had tainted her home. Surprisingly, Rachel began to show affection towards Richard, and now Emily is left to work alone, struggling to pay off her debt to Rachel. We decided to enjoy our peaceful days in a new land, free from the troubles of Rachel and the burdensome siblings-in-law.